imagine you're looking at this ultimate leaderboard of human achievement.
Right.
And your country has spent, 3 straight decades just clawing its way up the ranks. You've invested in your schools, you've built these world-class hospitals, your economy is totally roaring.
You're doing everything right.
Exactly. You look at the board, and you are sitting comfortably in the top 30 nations on Earth. You've basically won the game. But then, and this is where it gets crazy, a single hidden mathematical penalty is applied to the board.
Oh, yeah.
And as you watch, your society's rank just violently collapses. Like, you drop 34 places overnight. Everything you thought you knew about your country's success is suddenly just thrown into question.
It's a brutal reality check.
It really is. And today, we're going to show you exactly how that happens. We're doing a deep dive into why the very definition of, a successful civilization is being completely rewritten as we speak.
It's a profound paradigm shift, really.
Yeah.
Because we're moving from this era where we only measured what we built to an era where we're basically forced to measure what we destroy in order to build it.
Right. And to understand this shift, we're unpacking a really fascinating set of sources today. It actually feels highly confidential. It's this strictly formatted visual briefing focused entirely on Israel's human development data.
From 1990 all the way to 2023.
Yeah. So Israel is acting as our master case study today. But honestly, what immediately struck me about this source material wasn't just the data itself. It was the intense visual mandate of the briefing.
Oh, the design instructions, they are so specific.
Insanely specific. Like, there's no corporate gloss here at all. The designers were instructed to use this extreme, almost aggressive academic style.
Right, pure white backgrounds.
Yes, literally hex code FFFFFF. Pure white. No bright colors, no high saturation at all. Just dark gray or navy text. And absolutely no 3D charts.
None. They strictly forbade any 3D graphics. It had to be completely flat.
Flat and high density. And the only accent color allowed was this dark, alarming red. They just used these red dashed circles and the sharp little arrows to point out the data anomalies. It strips away all the PR spin. It forces you to just stare directly at the raw mechanics of human progress.
Which is such a deliberate aesthetic choice. Because when governments or, international bodies usually release these development reports, they're totally dressed up.
Oh, yeah. Lots of smiling people on the cover.
Exactly. They want to sell you a narrative of this continuous, unbroken triumph. But this briefing does the exact opposite. By using that sterile clinical style, it acts more like a diagnostic X-ray.
That's a great way to put it.
It treats human development not as a political talking point, but as this complex biological system that is currently exhibiting some really alarming symptoms.
So let's start with how we even define that system. Because, okay, let's unpack this. For the longest time, I just thought measuring a country's success was all about gross domestic product.
Right, the good old GDP.
Yeah. You look at the GDP, you see a jagged green line going up, and some analyst says, hey, we are richer, therefore we are better. But the framework in this briefing, the United Nations Development Program metrics, they basically throw GDP out the window as the sole measure of success.
And thank goodness they do, because GDP is a deeply flawed metric for human well-being. Think about it. If a country has a massive oil spill, right? And they have to spend billions of dollars cleaning it up, the GDP actually goes up.
Wait, really? Just from the cleanup effort?
Yeah, because of all the economic activity generated by hiring the cleanup crews and buying the equipment. But the society isn't better off. They just have a ruined coastline.
Wow, okay. That is a terrible way to measure success.
Exactly. And that's why the UN shifted to the HDI, the Human Development Index. This framework argues that true development is a synthesis. It's health, education, and income all together.
So it's asking, are your people living long lives? Are they educated enough to actually make choices?
Right. And do they have a decent standard of living?
Okay, that makes intuitive sense. Life expectancy and money. But the briefing doesn't stop there. It outlines this whole, constellation of acronyms branching off from that core idea.
It's a bit of an acronym soup at first.
Seriously. It introduces the GDI and the GII, which measure gender disparities. Then it brings in the IHDI, which adjusts the score for internal societal inequality. And then finally, the briefing places this stark red circle around this last acronym, the PHDI, the Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index. And I'm just looking at this like, why do we need 4 different acronyms to tell us if a country is doing well?
I get it. It sounds overly complex, but that red circle around the PHDI, that is the ticking time bomb of this entire
That
analysis.
was,
Because traditional metrics like the regular HDI, even the ones adjusted for inequality,
yeah.
they share a really fundamental blind spot. They only measure internal success.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning they evaluate what a country is doing for the people currently living inside its borders right now. They are entirely blind to the externalities.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this correctly,
Mm-hmm.
it's like evaluating a factory's success purely by looking at its profit margins, right?
Yeah.
And looking at how well it pays its workers, while completely ignoring the fact that it's, I don't know, dumping toxic sludge into the town's drinking water to achieve those profits.
That is a perfect analogy. The traditional HDI looks at the happy workers. The PHDI actually tests the water.
Okay, that is super clear.
The PHDI finally introduces the cost of doing business. It factors in a nation's per capita carbon dioxide emissions and its material footprint.
So it connects the internal prosperity to the external pressure on the planet.
Exactly. But before we get to the actual shock of the PHDI, we really need to understand just how successful the traditional model has been. We have to establish the global baseline.
Right. The briefing has this slide showing the global average HDI from 1990 to 2023. And honestly, looking at the aggregate data, it's a remarkably hopeful story.
It is.
Over those 3 decades, the global average steadily climbed from 0.608 up to 0.756.
And to give you some context on those numbers, a 0.608 back in 1990 is considered medium human development. But it was hovering dangerously close to the low category.
Yeah.
But by 2023, hitting 0.756, that pushes the world solidly into the high human development category.
That's a massive leap.
It is. Think about what that represents mathematically. It represents billions of individual human beings gaining access to antibiotics, to clean water, basic literacy, electricity. It is genuinely one of the greatest collective triumphs in the history of our species.
Though it wasn't a totally unbroken line, the data points out, one of those little red arrows, a very specific global backslide between 2020 and 2021. The score dropped down to 0.742.
Right, which was clearly the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, leaving a literal scar on the global data set, erasing years of life expectancy, stalling economies. But by 2023, the global average recovered to that 0.756 mark. So, generally speaking, we have a world that is fundamentally getting better, smarter, and wealthier.
But, and this is key, that 0.756 is just an average. It's the middle of the pack. When we shift our focus to Israel, our case study for today, we leave the middle of the pack entirely.
Oh, completely.
We are entering the realm of the statistical elite.
The gap is just staggering. I'm looking at slide 4 here, which has this dual-line chart. It tracks Israel's trajectory alongside the global average, and they aren't even in the same stratosphere.
Not at all.
Back in 1990, Israel was already way ahead with an HDI of 0.787. But by 2023, they have rocketed up to an incredible 0.919.
Achieving a score above 0.9 is extraordinarily rare. It places Israel at the 27th rank globally out of nearly 200 UN-recognized nations.
Wow, top 30.
Yeah, that cements them firmly in the highest possible tier. Very high human development. Only a tiny fraction of the global population gets to experience a society engineered to that level of proficiency.
See, when I see a gap that massive, my immediate thought is just, what are they doing differently?
Right, what's under the hood?
Exactly. And the briefing breaks down the anatomy of this 0.919 score into its foundational pillars. And they use these really cool dumbbell charts to show the contrast. Let's look at the human metrics first, starting with life expectancy.
The foundation of everything.
Yeah. So the global average right now is 73.4 years. Israel's life expectancy is 82.4 years.
That is nearly an entire extra decade of life.
Which is wild to think about.
And we shouldn't just gloss over that number.
Yeah.
Think about the cascading societal effects of an extra 9 years of life expectancy. It changes the fundamental psychology of a nation.
How so?
Well, it means generational knowledge is preserved longer. Grandparents are around and actively involved in raising grandchildren, which alleviates childcare burdens and allows the parents to remain in the workforce.
Oh, I hadn't even thought about the economic impact of grandparents.
It's huge. It also means citizens have a much longer horizon to reap the rewards of their investments in their education.
And speaking of education, that is the second massive pillar here. The global expected years of schooling sits at 13.04 years. Which, basically gets a person through high school and maybe a short vocational stint.
Right.
But Israel's expected years of schooling is 14.93 years. Almost 15 years.
Exactly. When your average citizen is brushing up against 15 years of formal education, you have moved far beyond basic literacy.
You're in university territory.
Yes. You are cultivating a society where tertiary education, specialized college degrees, and advanced technical training are just the baseline expectation. You are minting engineers, researchers, and highly specialized professionals at absolute scale.
And this is where the engine really starts humming.
Hmm.
Because health and education, they don't exist in a vacuum.
No, they are expensive.
Very expensive. They require massive amounts of funding, but then they also generate massive amounts of funding. When we look at the economic engine behind this, the disparity is almost unbelievable. Let's talk about the gross national income per capita.
The GNI. So the global average GNI per capita in 2023 is roughly $20,327.
Okay.
Israel's GNI per capita is $48,050.
That's more than double.
It is a 2.36-fold difference, to be exact. The briefing highlights this with a huge arrow.
It's just a compounding loop at this point.
Right.
I look at these three pillars, the 82 years of life, the 15 years of education, the $48,000 income, and it feels like comparing a weekend jogger to an Olympic marathoner.
That's a good way to look at it.
Like the global average is the weekend jogger. They're doing their best, eating a bit healthier, making slow, steady improvements to their cardio year over year.
Taking it one day at a time.
Right. But Israel, in this context, is the Olympic marathoner. They have access to the elite sports medicine, which pushes life expectancy to 82. They have the elite coaching and technique, the 15 years of schooling. And they have the elite high-calorie diet to fuel it all, the $48,000 GNI.
I love that analogy.
They haven't just improved, they built this absolute self-reinforcing fortress of human capital.
They really have. The variables feed each other. High-income funds the advanced healthcare infrastructure. That advanced healthcare keeps the highly educated workforce healthy and productive for decades.
Which then lets them earn more money.
Exactly. That highly skilled veteran workforce demands higher wages, pushing the GNI even higher. It is the ultimate virtuous cycle. But, and this is a crucial but, a high national average doesn't automatically mean a successful society.
Right, because averages can lie. You could have 1 billionaire and 9 people with $0, and the average still looks great.
Exactly. Going back to your marathoner, they might have incredible leg strength, but a super weak core that eventually causes a catastrophic injury.
Oh, interesting.
A country can have a massive GNI, but if 90% of that wealth is hoarded by a handful of oligarchs, or if half the population is systematically barred from participating in the economy, that society is fundamentally fragile.
Because all that potential is just sitting there, locked up.
Right. It's prone to unrest, inefficiency, and wasted potential. That's why the data forces us to put this Israeli miracle through what we can call the inclusivity test.
Which brings us to the metrics that measure how this wealth and health are actually distributed across the population. And the data on gender equality here is really striking.
The GI.
Yeah, the Gender Inequality Index. It measures the loss of achievement within a country due to gender disparity. And the way this metric works is, the closer the score is to 0, the closer society is to perfect equality.
Exactly.
So back in 1990, Israel was sitting at 0.337. But by 2023, they have driven that down to an incredibly low 0.08, ranking 27th globally.
And we can actually anchor that abstract 0.08 score in some very real tangible outcomes. For example, the share of parliamentary seats held by women in Israel rose from just 7.5% in 1990 to over 24% in 2023.
Which is a huge structural shift in who holds the levers of power.
Absolutely. But the statistic that truly acts as a proxy for institutional competence and equality is the maternal mortality rate.
Man, that number stopped me in my tracks when I read the briefing.
It's sobering.
The global average for maternal mortality in 2023 is roughly 216 deaths per 100,000 live births. Israel's rate is 2.4.
2.4?
Just 2.4 deaths per 100,000. That is an almost 90-fold difference. I mean, it barely even registers on the same chart.
And that 2.4 number is profound because maternal mortality is notoriously difficult to eradicate. It's not something you can just fix by passing a single law.
You need infrastructure.
Massive infrastructure. It requires a highly synchronized, universally accessible healthcare system. It proves that the $48,000 per capita wealth isn't just sitting in offshore investment accounts.
Right, it's actually doing something.
It is actively, efficiently deployed in the form of world-class maternal wards, prenatal monitoring, emergency surgical infrastructure, and blood banks that are accessible to women across the entire societal spectrum.
So the gender inclusivity is exceptionally strong. But what about broader economic and social inequality? like the gap between the rich and the poor. The UN tackles this using the IHDI, the Inequality-Adjusted Human Development Index. And I honestly love the mathematical philosophy behind this metric.
It's very clever.
It basically treats societal inequality as a literal tax, like a penalty on a nation's development score. They visualize it with this big waterfall chart.
That's precisely how the math functions. The UN uses a specific formula to calculate the loss in potential when health, education, and income are unevenly distributed. Think of it as a friction coefficient in an engine.
Okay, I like that.
If you have two countries with the exact same average income, but in country A, everyone makes exactly $50,000, and in country B, one person makes $1 million while everyone else is in poverty, country B will suffer a massive penalty under the IHDI.
Because it measures the human potential that is lost when resources are hoarded rather than shared. Yeah. And when you look at the global baseline through this lens, it is incredibly grim. When you factor in how resources are hoarded globally, the world hemorrhages nearly 22% of its total developmental value.
Almost a quarter.
Let that sink in for a second. More than a fifth of human progress over the last 30 years is mathematically erased because of unequal distribution. The global HDI plummets from 0.756 all the way down to 0.590.
It reveals how insanely inefficient the global system truly is. We are leaving so much potential on the table, but when we apply that same inequality tax to Israel, we see a very different level of societal resilience.
Yeah, their deduction is only 11.53%.
Right, so their elite score of 0.919 only drops to 0.813.
Which still keeps them in a very high tier. And the slide literally has this stark red circle highlighting the comparison, the 11.53% Israeli penalty versus the 21.96% global penalty.
And what this tells us is that Israel hasn't just grown rich and healthy. They have engineered a society with a high degree of internal stability.
It's robust.
Exactly. A loss of 11.53% implies that, yes, inequality absolutely exists, as it does in literally every capitalist economy. But the fundamental baselines of quality education, advanced healthcare, and economic opportunity are distributed widely enough to resist catastrophic developmental loss. They have built an incredibly resilient internal ecosystem.
Okay, here's where the bottom falls out.
Oh, yeah. Brace yourself.
If you stop the analysis right here, the story is just totally triumphant. Israel is the gold medalist. They have the money, the health, the education, and the equality. But then the briefing introduces that final acronym we talked about at the very beginning.
Oh, yeah, PHDI.
The Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index.
Yeah.
And the entire narrative just violently fractures.
This is the sword of Damocles hanging over the modern world. The PHDI fundamentally changes the rules of the game. It basically steps in and says, congratulations on building this beautiful, highly educated, long-living society. Now let's look at the invoice you just handed to the planet to pay for it.
And the visual they use to reveal this is so stark. It's this cliff-like drop in a rank slope chart. On one side, you have Israel sitting proudly at rank 27 for traditional human development. Then the PHDI metric is applied, and their position just free falls to rank 62. There's this massive, thick red arrow pointing straight down with a brutal caption, difference from HDI rank, minus 34.
It is a breathtaking statistical collapse. I mean, almost a quarter of their developmental achievement, 22.85% to be exact, is mathematically vaporized because it is built on an entirely unsustainable ecological foundation.
Their score just bleeds out, dropping to a mere 0.709. They are fully ejected from the elite tier. I have to admit, when I first processed this rank drop, I felt a strong urge to push back against the methodology.
It's a very common reaction.
I mean, is it really fair to penalize a country's human development score? To mathematically claim their education and health are somehow worth less just because they use industrial materials? Doesn't a high standard of living inherently require energy, concrete, and logistics? It feels like the UN ecologists are turning progress into a dirty word.
I totally get that. It feels punitive, like you're being punished for succeeding. But the PHDI isn't making a moral judgment that Israel's hospitals or universities are bad.
Right.
It's not denying the reality that its citizens live to 82. What the PHDI is enforcing is a matter of fundamental accounting reality.
Accounting.
Yeah. You cannot claim your developmental model is a success if the physical mechanics of that model ensure its eventual destruction.
So it really is a measure of longevity, but for the society itself, not just the individual citizen.
Exactly. Let's expand on your earlier factory analogy. Imagine you and I are evaluating a household's financial success. You look at their lifestyle today. They live in a 10-bedroom mansion, they drive imported sports cars, they eat at Michelin-star restaurants every night. Under the traditional HDI, you rank them as the most successful family in the neighborhood.
They're crushing it.
But then I pull their credit report, and I see they make $60,000 a year, and their entire lifestyle is funded by millions of dollars in high-interest credit card debt.
Oh, wow. So the illusion shatters.
Right. They aren't wealthy, they're highly leveraged, their lifestyle isn't a success, it is a pending default. And that is exactly what the PHDI does. The Earth's ecological carrying capacity is the credit limit.
That makes so much sense.
The traditional HDI looks at the mansion and the cars. The PHDI looks at the debt-to-income ratio. And it reveals that elite, high HDI nations are drastically over their credit limit, and the interest rates, in the form of climate instability, resource scarcity, extreme weather, are about to compound.
Okay, that makes the 34-place drop make total sense. You are literally adjusting their score for the impending default. So let's act as the forensic accountants here and dive into the specific debts they are racking up. What exactly is causing this massive penalty?
There are two main culprits.
Yeah, the data isolates two specific pathogens in this ecological illness. Symptom 1 is carbon emissions.
The carbon math is straightforward but very unforgiving. The global average for per capita CO2 emissions is 4.53 tons per year.
Okay.
Israel's per capita output sits at 6.48 tons. Now, the briefing does note a slight downward trend. They were emitting 7.46 tons back in 1990, so there is some increased efficiency happening.
Sure, they're making an effort.
But 6.48 tons is still 43% above the global average. And fundamentally, that level is incompatible with stabilizing the global climate.
Now, 43% above the global average is bad, clearly. But when I was reading this, a 43% carbon excess didn't seem quite drastic enough to trigger a catastrophic 34-place rank freefall.
It's not. That's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, exactly. Because carbon is only half the equation. The real shocker, the absolute gut punch of this entire analysis, is the second symptom, the material footprint.
This is the metric that truly exposes the hidden mass of modern civilization. Because the material footprint isn't just about what you throw in the garbage bag at the end of the week.
Right.
It is the total volume of raw biomass, fossil fuels, metal ores, and non-metallic minerals extracted from the earth to meet the consumption demands of a society per person.
And the briefing presents this disparity through sheer volume. They use this massive square area chart. The global average material footprint is 12.71 tons per person, which honestly already sounds like a lot.
That is a lot.
But Israel's material footprint is an absolutely staggering 33.58 tons per person. The data explicitly highlights this with a stark red line, a 2.6x gap between them and the rest of the world.
33.58 tons for every single human being within its borders, every single year.
Our brains are simply not evolved to comprehend what 32.5 tons of physical matter actually looks or feels like.
No, it just sounds like an abstract number.
So I started trying to visualize it. Think about a standard heavy-duty pickup truck, like an F-150. That weighs roughly 2.5 tons. Israel's material footprint is the equivalent of requiring more than 13 heavy-duty pickup trucks worth of raw, physical earth to be mined, harvested, processed, and consumed for every single citizen.
From newborn infants to 82-year-old retirees.
Yes, every 12 months. 13 trucks per person every year.
And we really have to unpack what is actually inside those 13 pickup trucks.
Yeah.
Because this isn't just consumer plastic and cardboard boxes. We are talking about the invisible weight of a highly developed society.
The hidden infrastructure.
Exactly. It's the thousands of pounds of construction sand and limestone required to pour the concrete for their advanced hospital wings. It's the lithium, cobalt, and rare earth metals mined globally to power the laptops and servers of their highly educated tech workforce.
It's all the stuff that makes the HDI so high.
It is. It's the immense agricultural biomass, the fertilizers, the feed, the water-intensive crops required to sustain a diet that supports an 82-year life expectancy.
It fundamentally changes how you view a pristine high-tech city. You look at a sleek glass skyscraper or a quiet university campus, and you realize it is essentially a monument to extreme resource extraction.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
The long life expectancy, the 15 years of education, the $48,000 income, it is all structurally dependent on devouring the physical earth at a rate 2.5 times faster than the rest of humanity.
It forces a very uncomfortable realization. The miracle of their development wasn't created out of thin air through sheer willpower and intelligence. It was purchased. and it was purchased using materials extracted from a finite planetary bank account.
Reading this made me intensely hyper-aware of my own surroundings. I mean, I started mentally weighing the concrete foundation of my house, the steel on my car, the miles of copper wire in my walls, the packaging on my groceries.
It's overwhelming when you start looking at the world that way.
It really is. It forces you to ask, what is my personal material footprint? Am I dragging 13 pickup trucks of earth behind me every year just to maintain my baseline standard of living?
And the scary part is, depending on where you live, you probably are.
Which inevitably leads to the next big question. Is Israel just a uniquely terrible offender? Like, are they exceptionally gluttonous, or is this a symptom of a much wider disease?
The data answers that question by zooming out and holding up a global mirror. This isn't just an indictment of Israel. Israel is merely the perfect, crystallized specimen of a systemic global phenomenon.
Oh.
The briefing uses a 4-quadrant scatter plot to map out every country, comparing their traditional HDI score on the x-axis against their planetary pressure on the y-axis.
And when you look at that plot, you immediately see the trap we have built for ourselves. Because ideally, you would want to see a cluster of countries in the quadrant representing high human development and low ecological pressure.
The golden quadrant.
Right. You want to see rich, healthy, highly educated countries that don't destroy the planet. But that quadrant is basically a ghost town.
It is entirely empty. The data proves a harsh, almost tragic paradox. Highly developed nations are uniformly high-pressure nations. True human development and ecological preservation have completely decoupled.
They just don't coexist right now.
Earlier, we noted that the global average HDI loses about 10% of its value when adjusted for planetary pressure. But when you look at the extreme high-income elite HDI nations, the exclusive club that Israel belongs to, they're routinely losing 20%, 22%, or even 25% of their score.
I mean, why is that an absolute rule? These are the richest, most highly educated countries on Earth. Why can't a rich country just use its $48,000 per capita income to buy its way into being green?
You'd think they could, right?
Yeah. Why can't they just build massive solar farms and electric vehicle fleets and fix the math?
Because of a concept economists call high-carbon lock-in, combined with the sheer physics of their infrastructure. When a country develops rapidly using the blueprints of the 20th and early 21st centuries, it permanently alters its physical reality.
Okay, what does that mean practically?
It means they build sprawling suburban networks that absolutely mandate private car ownership. They build massive concrete infrastructures that require constant carbon-heavy maintenance. And most importantly, they build hyper-consumerist economic models where their GNI growth relies entirely on citizens constantly buying, discarding, and replacing manufactured goods.
Ah, I see. You can't just slap a solar panel on a societal system that fundamentally requires 33.5 tons of fresh material per person just to maintain its baseline functions.
Exactly.
The energy source might be cleaner, but the material appetite is still absolutely ravenous. The underlying operating system itself is the flaw.
You nailed it. You can power an electric vehicle at the sunshine, but you still had to rip tons of ore out of the earth to build the battery, the chassis, and the asphalt road it drives on. And this brings us to the grand synthesis of the briefing. They visualize this whole dilemma using a classic balance scale.
Yeah, slide 14. On the left side of the scale, resting heavily, is a stack representing the internal triumphs. The 82-year life expectancy, the 15 years of education, the $48,000 income, the incredibly low maternal mortality and inequality.
It is a massive, undeniable stack of human achievement. Israel successfully built a world-class fortress of human capital.
But the right side of the scale represents the external cost, the ecological weight, the 33.5-ton footprint, the carbon emissions, and the scale is tipping violently.
The conclusions here are stark. Point 1, the internal fortress of human well-being was successfully built. Point 2, this triumph was purchased entirely via massive externalized ecological extraction.
And point 3 is the ultimate reality check. The limit has been reached.
We hit the ceiling.
The high-consumption, traditional HDI growth model has hit the Earth's physical capacity. We have maxed out the credit card. The bank is calling in the debt. Which brings us to the final section of the analysis, the path forward. How do we break this paradox of prosperity?
The briefing actually outlines a 3-step mandate for policymakers. It's a flowchart connected by those red arrows.
Step 1 is metric reconstruction, which is basically saying we have to fundamentally change how we define winning the game of civilization.
Yes. Politicians, media, policymakers, they must stop chasing traditional HDI or GDP as their ultimate goals. We have to make the PHDI the new non-negotiable gold standard for political and economic success.
So if a prime minister holds a press conference boasting about raising the national income or building new highways,
The immediate reflexive counter-question from society must be, but what did that do to our PHDI? Did you raise our standard of living, or did you just borrow more against our carrying capacity? We must force global leaders to manage the ecological deficit as aggressively and strictly as they manage the financial deficit.
that makes a lot of sense. Change the scoreboard, and you change how the players play the game. Step 2 on the flow chart is material decoupling. Now, decoupling sounds like really dry economic jargon, but the actual concept is revolutionary.
It really is. Right now, as we've seen, if a country's wealth grows, its material footprint grows right alongside it. They are coupled together. Decoupling means figuring out how to make human prosperity continue to rise while the absolute material footprint actually shrinks.
And that is arguably the hardest engineering challenge in human history. It requires moving away from an extractive linear economy where we take, make, and throw away toward a true radical circular economy.
Exactly.
But how does that actually work in practice? Because right now, recycling just feels like putting my plastic bottles in a blue bin and hoping for the best.
True material decoupling is light years beyond a blue recycling bin. It means fundamentally redesigning the molecular life cycle of our physical world. For example, right now when a smartphone or a laptop dies, it generally becomes e-waste.
Right, it ends up in a landfill.
Decoupling means designing that laptop so that when it dies, 100% of the lithium, copper, and rare earths inside it can be easily extracted and immediately used to build the next generation of laptops, with zero loss of quality.
Wow, so we just reuse the same atoms over and over.
Exactly. It means we stop extracting virgin metal from the earth and start treating our own massive waste streams as our new mines. It means designing buildings that can be disassembled and rebuilt rather than demolished. It is economic growth fueled by extreme material efficiency, not extraction.
Which leads perfectly into the third and final step of the mandate, global responsibility. And this points the finger right back at nations like Israel and every other country sitting in that top 30 tier.
They have a huge role to play here.
The argument is that nations with these elite education scores, these 15 years of schooling, and these massive $48,000 GNI budgets have both a moral and a highly practical obligation. They have the money. They have the advanced research laboratories. They have the world-class scientists and universities. They must use those massive brains and budgets to transition from being ecological overdrafters to becoming green tech exporters.
It is a profound twist of fate, isn't it? The argument is that the very human capital they spent 30 years building, the longevity, the intellect, the wealth, is exactly what must now be urgently deployed to solve the existential crisis that building it caused in the first place.
They have to invent the way out.
Yes. They owe it to the global baseline, to the billions of people still trying to reach a basic standard of living, to invent the decoupling technologies that will allow the rest of the world to develop without triggering an ecological collapse.
Let's take a breath and zoom out for a second. We just went on an incredibly intense journey through a remarkably quiet, stark white, meticulously formatted data briefing.
It's quite a trick.
We started with the comforting, almost triumphant statistics of a nation doing everything right by the old rules. We watched life expectancy soar past 82 years. We watched wealth multiply. We watched inequality shrink.
A true success story on paper.
And then, with the flip of a single metric, the PHDI, we watched a devastating 34-place rank collapse that exposed the invisible 33-ton material weight tied to the ankles of that progress. It is a profound, almost dizzying reminder of how data visualizations and the specific metrics we choose to care about dictate our entire perception of reality.
It truly does. And as we process all this data, I want to leave you, the listener, with a lingering philosophical question. It's a problem born directly from the math we just discussed, but it isn't explicitly answered anywhere in those white pages or red circles.
That's a good question.
If our current universally accepted definition of the highest human development inherently requires the extraction, consumption, and destruction of the very ecosystem that supports those humans, do we need to fundamentally redefine what it means to be a civilized society?
Man, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because for thousands of years, our definition of civilization has been intrinsically linked to domination and extraction.
Exactly. Think about human history. For centuries, we have measured the greatness of a civilization by the monuments they built. We judge the Egyptians by the limestone they quarried for the pyramids. We judge the Romans by the concrete they poured for the aqueducts.
We judge modern empires by the steel they forge and the forests they clear.
Our entire cultural mythology equating civilization with extraction is deeply ingrained in us.
We view the mastery of materials as the ultimate proof of our intelligence.
Right. But as we look at that plummeting PhDI line, as we look at the reality of the 34-place drop, we have to wonder if that era of measurement is officially over. Is true? Evolved human development still measured by what we can build, extract, and conquer?
Or going forward, will the most advanced elite civilizations on Earth be measured by the exact opposite?
Exactly. Will they be measured by their restraint, by the efficiency of their design, by what they can successfully, intelligently leave untouched?
It's an incredible thought. The ultimate flex of an advanced civilization won't be a massive skyscraper or the 33-ton footprint. The ultimate flex will be a society that lives to 85, discovers cures for diseases, writes incredible literature, and leaves absolutely zero trace on the Earth while doing it. As we said at the start, the PhDI breaks the old X-ray machine. It forces us to look at a completely new diagnosis, and it demands that we build a completely new kind of future.